All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I'm your host, Redbeard, and just 1 minute here, I will be joined by Scott Horton. I will bring Scott up to the stage now. Scott, it's great to have you back, man.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who are familiar with Scott, you already know many of his accolades. For those of you who aren't, he's the director of the Scott Horton Academy, the Libertarian Institute. He's the director of, or the editorial director of antiwar.com. He's written several books, such as Provoked and Enough Already. He's done thousands upon thousands of podcasts, more than I'll probably ever get around to. But he also has his own podcast, The Scott Horton Show, and he also co-hosts Provoked with Daryl Cooper, which I love that show. Admittedly, it's you and Daryl have great chemistry on that show. Yeah, man. So you've done a lot of things. So, and needless to say, I feel like you and Daryl and many of the people that you have, you've been on their shows recently. There's a lot to talk about, man. So thanks.
Yeah, that's the bad part, right? Is there's so much demand for what I do, which is criticizing the war state, which
Right.
never rests.
Right. Exactly. And just to kind of kick it off, something that I found was kind of interesting that popped up just recently, I think within like the past, what is it, like 12 hours, is I saw this article and I saw a few people remark about this, which I thought was pretty interesting. Now the Pentagon's going to automakers to talk about boosting weapons production, and I'm sure several other things, which has a whole host of its own problems. And then last week, I'd actually brought up a article from Disclose where they had talked about automating the selective service. So it's like when I see these things, Scott, it's kind of, man, it really makes a guy wonder what is going on. And I figured we'd start here before we moved into Iran, because what are they trying to tell us?
Good question. I mean, you're talking about actually, instating conscription and having Ford and General Motors start cranking out tanks. I mean, that sounds like preparation for conflict with a major power.
Right.
Which, all of which have nuclear weapons and are nuclear weapons use prohibitive on that basis. So, I hate being an alarmist. I mean, the simplest explanation, right, is they're just putting all these companies on welfare because they paid for it with the tax money that they stole in the first place. And so that's how it goes, Look, if they were going to actually invade and conquer and regime change Iran, it would take a World War II type effort.
Right.
Like D-Day style, sending in, a millions-man army to go and take out the thing. It would be, the world on pause until we're done level effort and catastrophe. And it'd be much more difficult. I mean, there's two massive mountain ranges there.
Right.
There's a lot of reason why it would be different. I mean, well, what the hell? They would not be up against the Wehrmacht, but they would be up against a million-man army with another few million volunteers at least. And listen, in 25 years of this, nobody ever said, yeah, what we should do is conscript this massive proportion of fighting age males from America and send them all to sack and occupy Tehran and teach them to elect good men. I mean, give me a break, man. That is not going to happen. Okay. So what use could they be? I mean, you're not going to use them against Russia or China. That would be, if we got into a real war with Russia or China, it'd be over in a week, probably within a day or two. I mean, the only question would be, how long does it, I mean, you could have a skirmish, whatever, Top Gun, where some planes get shot down and then everybody chills out or something. But a real ass, like one side attacks the other,
Yeah.
and attempt to destroy it, or, make it capitulate to severe terms of whatever description kind of thing. The only question would be how long before the nuclear bombs start going off.
And
And then
that's
at
exactly
that
it.
point, whether it's just really, like they say,
Mhm.
automatic, that once the nukes start going off, we go to general nuclear war and kill
Mhm.
everybody, or whether there's some way of ramping down after we regret losing San Diego and Honolulu, or, what, I don't know. But
Right.
there, who else the hell are we going to attack with a millions man conscript army?
Mhm.
Not any of our friends anywhere in Europe, from, Lisbon to Moscow. Like, that's
Right.
not gonna happen, dude. Um, well, we're gonna invade Egypt or whatever. We got loyal sock puppet dictatorship there. We're gonna
Yeah.
reinvade Iraq and help the Sunnis kick all the Shiites out of Baghdad this time and reverse Iraq War II. I don't think
Right.
so. Right. So, dislodge the Taliban, protect women's rights in Afghanistan. I'm running out of places to attack. North Korea, they got atom
Yep.
bombs.
Mhm.
So, there are very few people who are outside of America's, very few nation states that are outside of America's sphere of influence already,
Right.
who don't have a nuclear deterrent.
Mhm.
And it's hard to imagine that Trump, even at his most emotional, is not deterred by nuclear weapon states. I mean, this is the
Right.
whole thing about, as Paul Wolfowitz said about Iraq War II. Why did we do Iraq? Because it was doable. In other
Yeah.
words, they knew Saddam was helpless. Not that he was a great danger that had to be preempted, but they knew
Right.
that they could take him,
Yeah.
and they're overconfident here. It turns out that no, they can't take him, but that was
Mhm.
essentially what they were sold, was that, yeah, it'll be easy. So go ahead and try it.
And do you
They
think that
absolutely should have known
Venezuela
better. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, do you just to that point, do you think that Venezuela is kind of was a big catalyst of that?
Yes.
They saw what happened and they're
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh, dude, we got this. This is a
Well, that's
weekend
what we all
event."
said after
Yeah.
Venezuela was, "Oh, no,
Right.
that's the worst thing that could happen here." In a way, would be that it would go off without a hitch in such a way
Right.
where Donald Trump feels essentially
Yeah.
just magic and unstoppable. I mean,
Right.
if Bill Clinton wants to send the Combat Applications Group to massacre all the Branch Davidians, they can get it done,
Mhm.
right? You want to send, whatever team it was, to go in there and pluck Maduro and his wife out of their bed like it's an Afghan night raid, then they can
Mhm.
do that too. Um, but as we talked about, on the show, and various people interviewing me on shows, that you can easily put yourself right in Donald Trump's position. That, like, oh
Mhm.
wow, look how easy that was for me to order these guys to go and do a thing, right?
Right.
Um, and so then I had said then that, like, look, I don't think anybody thinks that they could kidnap the Ayatollah. That's not
Mhm.
what we're talking about here. The Ayatollah in Tehran ain't Maduro. I mean, this is a simple situation.
Right.
Caracas, yeah. Um, so, but they can drop a 20,000-pound bomb on his head, or a
Sure.
2,000-pound bomb on his head.
Mhm.
If you can put eyeballs on him, you could put a bomb on him and do
Right.
that. Nobody doubts the ability of the United States of America to do that.
Mhm.
So, um, then that means that the argument can be constructed for Trump's consumption, right? That, like, yes, this will be
Sure.
easy like that. We'll put a bomb on his head the same way we kidnapped Maduro and that solved all our problems. And we got a
Mhm.
compliant new guy in charge there, new lady, but whatever, from the old regime still, but compliant.
Right.
This will be like some species of that. We'll bomb them into compliance and it'll be
Yeah.
easy. And because, you know, when you think about how arrogant somebody like, I mean, it really, any president would be in the first place, who could even put themselves in that position. But think about how arrogant
Mhm.
W. Bush or Barack Obama were when you combine their ego, hell, Biden too, combine their ego, Bill
Right.
Clinton too, with the power of the US military regime. I mean, it is the world empire itself. The Pentagon is
Yeah.
the world empire. Can they deliver firepower to targets? Roger that. Aye, aye, Captain. You
Yeah.
point, I'll shoot. That's the
That's
job,
right.
dude. Yes, sir, Mr. President is the job. And so if
Mhm.
you're the president and if you're Donald Trump's level of self-regard with this ultimate power over life and death, and again, not
Mhm.
even forget even the H bombs, but the ability
Sure.
to, as they called it in the Obama years, they would call, a drone strike that would kill 75 people or 100 people. They would say, that's a scalpel.
Oh,
That
yeah.
is
Yep.
that is a extremely limited, careful, clinical procedure, right? Where
Right. Yeah.
even the casualties are to us very small, but then that makes it like even cooler, right? It makes it even easier
Mhm.
for the president to do it. They would call it a signature strike,
Right.
um, where they would even kill, and that didn't mean you got to get the president's signature on it. That meant
Mhm.
the person you're killing has the signature of someone who's a bad guy. Like, in other words, he gets up in the morning and takes a truck to work. Well, that's just what a
Right.
bad guy terrorist would do. And so they kill that guy. These
Right.
guys exercise, they do jumping jacks and run around circles in the morning. Well, we've seen
Right.
terrorists do that before too. So we kill them. This guy's got an antenna because he's got a walkie-talkie in his back
Right.
pocket, and so that's makes him a terrorist.
And none of it's war by their definition too, Scott. Remember that. None of it's war.
Oh no, of course not. It's just they're just exercising their will in a
Of course,
special
yeah.
kinetic police action activity procedure.
Whatever
And
flavor
Trump,
of
yeah,
force they
Trump
want.
got feeling. In answer to your question, yes, Trump was completely inflated, full of hubris after
Mhm.
Venezuela. And I
Yeah.
think Tucker Carlson may have explicitly said to him, I believe that he addressed this with him because I asked Tucker, is he totally drunk on this Venezuela thing, or has he had an
Mhm.
opportunity to sober up at all? And he just said not sober. But
Mhm.
like I think so. I'm inferring too much. I shouldn't say. I don't know, but I think that Tucker would have said something to him like, "Now listen,
Sure.
sir, that was really cool, but this
Mhm.
is so much more difficult. This is not that.
Yeah.
Don't be W. Bush now and think that this is that because they're different." You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
something. But
exactly.
to him, nah, man, he's was feeling unstoppable. And for someone my age, this was absolutely the feeling during Iraq War II. And again, they
Mhm.
knew Iraq was much more, was a much weaker state than Iran even was then,
Sure.
much less now. Um, but the idea was not just that we could go in there and sack Baghdad and ultimately
Mhm.
defeat Iraq's army and drive them out of power. No mountain ranges there, dude. This is fine.
Right.
We're gonna roll right in there and kick their asses. No question. In fact, this is, it's right around this anniversary. It's the middle of April of 2003 when they did that. And there was
Mhm.
no question that our Army and Marine Corps could accomplish that. You know what I mean? We got
Right.
tanks and we got air power and, whatever. But then the idea was that was so easy that telling the Iraqi people what to do will be even easier because they're not even an army, right? They're just like
Right.
extras in our
Exactly.
movie. They're just like dummies to be moved around.
Mhm.
And then, but the reality was, no, they're not. They're armed factions of fighting men, is what they are, and here they go to war, right? And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there was absolutely a conception that look at our big green machine of
Mhm.
strength. Are you saying that you think a bunch of Iraqi militiamen can stand up against our heroic heroes and their ultimate power? And it's like, look, man, like
Right.
nobody doubts our guys are well armed and well trained and are very,
Exactly.
very brave and whatever, but
Right.
that's not everything. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It comes down to, if I saw people making this mistake this morning. A guy said America and Israel together are an unstoppable force of power. And it's
Mhm.
like, look, from that point of view, you're smart. Yes, we have hardware as hell,
Yes.
man. We got scopes that can make sure that things explode the things that they were meant to explode. Like, no
Mhm.
one doubts that.
Right.
This is only tactics and operations. This
Mhm.
is not strategy. Just blowing up the now, there's a point where just blowing up the other guy is enough, but not air war. I mean, look at Barack Obama
Right.
and Donald Trump bombed Yemen for 8 years. I mean, they helped Saudi and UAE do it, but actually
Mhm.
that just made the air war more ruthless because they had the denial there. They had the diffusion of responsibility there. So they were bombing the crap out of their
Mhm.
entire civilian infrastructure and everything, decimating whatever armed force the Houthis had. The Houthis were not 1% degraded in their authority over the people. In fact, only gained in power most of that time. I guess they had some setbacks, but they mostly
Sure.
gained in power that whole time and still rule the entire north and west of that country.
Right.
And you know, could our Marines sack Sana'a and do a regime change there? Yes. Could
Mhm.
they? I'm not recommending it, because then could
Right.
they then dictate the outcome of the future of Yemen and balance the power of the Al Qaeda guys, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Southern Socialists, the Northern, Zaidi Shiite,
Mhm.
Houthi, Ansar Allah group, and all? Hell no. Are you
Right.
crazy? Can our guys beat you up? Yeah. Can they determine the future of the world through beating you up? No.
And that's the
No, they
major question right
cannot.
there. Yeah. Yep. And that's, and just looking at all of this before we start getting into the further debacle that is the Iran war and the Hormuz issue and all of that. But, I remember it wasn't even that long ago where it might have been on Daniel Davis's show. I listened to a variety of shows because I like Daniel Davis and I like Colonel McGregor and a bunch of those
Yeah.
other guys. And it seems like even since 2022 with like the whole Ukraine thing as well, but like the common theme is like, look, like we're running through a lot of our hardware too. And it's, so I wonder when you go back and you look at, this new like armament campaign of the Pentagon trying to bring in, your vehicles, manufacturer, it's just like, is that to try and just bolster the numbers we lost, or are they actually trying to get far more expansionist too, because it's like as I said in the beginning, like, how do we read this? And I could, I could kind of give the benefit of the doubt of people being like, well, we just want them to come in and try and replace what was lost. Okay. I guess I can understand that, but
Same difference.
I, yeah,
It's both, man, right? It's
yeah.
look, when I was a kid,
Hmm.
people would talk about Vietnam, how this
Hmm.
was a phenomenon in Vietnam, and the guys
Right.
knew it, that their job was emptying the inventory so that it could be
Right.
refilled,
Yeah.
right? That was in some part the motivation of the war, right?
Sure. Yep.
In some by some people involved in it, to say the least. Bell Helicopter
Right.
wanted the war to continue on. So they wanted to lose helicopters so they could make more helicopters. Okay. And that makes
Hmm.
sense for them to bribe Lyndon Johnson to do that for them, right?
Hmm.
At the expense of the rest of our society. But that's what's good for Bell Helicopter or whatever.
Right.
So is there, was there always a danger that people would listen to me and say, we do have to get out of Afghanistan, but that then they would immediately pivot to Ukraine and make that worse?
Hmm.
Yes, and they did.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Like, man, what the hell? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Right.
So yes, they demand to stay busy. They absolutely
Yes.
do. And geez, I'm trying to think of the quote because man, I'm sorry. There was some
No. Yeah.
course recently that said, like, yeah, no, like they require, absolutely require, this many $1 billion a year worth of spending out of their stocks to
Sure.
be replenished by,
Right.
and who knows,
Yeah.
like whatever, that was a whatever rough estimate from
Right.
someone
Yep.
involved that, like, yeah, I mean, that is a huge part of the game. In fact, it was a big part of the rise of the neoconservative
Hmm.
movement in the United States. This is explained by a lot of great ones, including Andrew Coburn,
Hmm.
the great journalist Andrew Coburn, about how essentially the kind of old waspy bankers and oilmen, the Brooks brothers, kind of Anglicans and Lutheran types or whatever from
Sure.
Yale-y, skull and bonesy types, they all ran the Council on Foreign Relations. And, the Rockefellers types, they were Presbyterians, but
Right.
um,
Yep.
They ran the Council on Foreign Relations. And then you had this whole kind of middle class intellectuals who were, many of them Jewish and Zionist, and also a lot of Catholics too.
Mhm.
And they weren't really allowed in. This is like in that era where it was still like very much the WASPs on top at that time kind of thing. And then, or
Right.
maybe this
Yep.
was like the very end of that era, really. And then what happened was the think tank, or the military industrial complex from out west, the arms firms, they have, of course, a huge need in Washington, D.C. to
Mhm.
keep their whole thing going. And they had their lobbyists and all. But what they really needed was their own Council on Foreign Relations is to recommend their policies, as opposed
Mhm.
to, not necessarily as opposed to, but just separate from whatever the oil and the bankers, they'll work together on various things and whatever. But like they
Right.
had their interests. And so what they needed was eggheads. So they hired all these Zionists, the neoconservative movement essentially,
Mhm.
and put them in charge, and gave them a bunch of money to make all their own think tanks, and so that they would recommend policies that serve the interests of primarily Lockheed, but also Boeing and Northrop and
Of
General
course. Yeah.
Atomics and General Dynamics and all of those guys. So in the neoconservative movement, and especially the rise of their dominance in the Republican Party in the 1980s and 1990s or 70s
Mhm.
through 90s and W. Bush era, um, they had the Bradley, Olin, and Scaife foundations. Then they also had all the military industrial complex firms, and they used
Mhm.
them to create the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, the Center for Security Policy, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies,
Right.
the Project for a New American Century, and then of course
Mhm.
later is the Center for New American Security, and the Foreign Policy Initiative, and just it's a whole
The list
four.
is
I
long.
left out 10 of them, right? So they made
Right.
all of their own
Yeah.
Council on Foreign Relations, and it was this alliance of the Zionists and the neoconservatives, really the
Sure.
vanguard of the Zionist movement in America, with the military industrial complex
Mhm.
behind them. And so you can see where they had their mutual interests, because all the guys at Boeing, they're engineers, right? They
Right.
need to hire a Zionist egghead to write a study about why the Pentagon really needs to buy these products from Boeing so that they can
Right.
use them to kill Arabs with, which
Right.
happen to be living on land that the Israelis want to steal.
Convenient that,
Yeah.
yeah. I think suffice to say, it's definitely one of those things to where it's like you always you pay attention to what people say, but then at the same time, it's like what they actually do in practice is extremely important. And so, when I see these moves, I guess to kind of bow tie this little segment here, but it's like what I see is okay, obviously, as you alluded to, like it's obviously going towards something because you're seeing, more control being exerted over selective service. You're seeing obviously the call for an increase in manufacturing, whatever that's going to look like. I don't see it being anything positive for us. I don't see anything positive coming back to us to where it's like, oh, Scott, all of a sudden we're totally more free and we don't have to worry about anything anymore. I doubt that's going to be the outcome.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha there, man. Yeah, for
it's,
sure.
in that being said, I guess pivoting over to the ridiculousness in my mind that is Hormuz, we're going to blockade your blockade in order to open things that were already open before all of this insanity happened to begin with. But, you know, um, what I've been trying to keep track of this, and perhaps you have a far better grasp than I do, and I would argue you probably do. But what the heck is going on over here? Because it seems like with the blockade that the U.S. just put in, there's ships going through, but then they're saying like, oh well, like we let a few ships through, but then you have other reports to where the ships just drove through, and so it's who's going through and like what does that look like? But then also, what is it? Is it going to culminate to anything, or are we just? Is it like a rearmament moment to where both sides are just kind of rearming, which I kind of am leaning more towards, to be honest. But or is it just one of these things to where maybe they're just trying to do it to um, have conversations again, which if I was Iran, I would be very, very trepidatious about any conversations in the future, given the track
Yeah.
record. But in all of that, to be complemented with this. And this is an article from antiwar.com by Dave DeCamp, which he talks about, the U.S. is sending even more people over there. And I think the totality from within the article, it was somewhere of like 60,000 people is what could be expected over in the area. So what's going on, Scott?
Well, first of all, man, I guess this must be true for some reason. But I saw a tweet this morning where it was a clip of Alan Dershowitz taking credit for the idea that he told Trump, you ought to blockade the blockade. And cut off the Strait Morris. He got that from Dershowitz. Jesus Christ. I don't know. Maybe. And then Dershowitz, may or may not have just been passing that on from the Israelis or what.
Sure.
And then, I also read a thing this morning by Larry Johnson, the former CIA officer, alluding to what you just mentioned there, that there are plenty of ships getting through because the Americans don't have the force in the region to stop them all at this point. So it's a big leaky sieve and they're, they're still going through there. And then, I suppose they might still really mean it. I mean, right now they're sort of pretending that it's working, but they still may just be getting enough ships in position, which is going to take a while. But Trump likes to make announcements ahead of time.
Of course he does.
And, Larry Johnson, I think it was, I'm sorry, man, I read a few different things this morning.
Oh, there's a lot going on. No.
I'm pretty sure it was Larry who said that he thinks that Trump's going to do one big, maybe, I don't know if he said one, but like a big strike, a massive attack, and then quit and say, haha, we showed you, we blew you up so bad, and then stop.
Right.
Somehow it's got to be getting through to him. I guess the presumption there is he's catching on that, like, there is no military solution to this thing, man. Like, he really should not have listened to the Israelis.
Yeah.
And I hate to quote Hillary Clinton in any approving way, but she is absolutely a treasonous, psychopathic killer and liar on many issues.
Yeah.
There's just no question that it's true that, as she told the story, that, look, Netanyahu would come to me all the time and go, here's why you got to attack Iran for me. And I would always listen to him, and then I would tell him no. And then she explained the reason why is because we didn't have a good idea of how to end it. We knew the start of war, but we couldn't end it. This is what I always told you guys since in 2007. Was when, in fact, I said this in 2005 at least, and I can prove it. You just check my archives at antiwar.com. Check my Twitter feed. I tweeted the thing not too long ago about it. But in 2007 was when I finally picked up on the term escalation dominance. And this is from the work of the great Gareth Porter, that the Pentagon told Bush they don't want to do Iran because, we can beat them, but they can fight back. And they will be able to get our guys. And we have a bunch of guys who will essentially be hostages, maybe just outright shot in the back like Order 66 in Iraq War II, when the Shiite militias all turn on our guys who they're embedded with now fighting the Sunni insurgency. But then also all of our bases in Iraq and Kuwait and all up and down the Gulf, and then $1 trillion worth of economic targets, and they can close the Strait of Hormuz. And they have this massive missile force that, we have a lot of defensive missiles, but we don't have that many defensive missiles that we can shoot down as much as they can deliver in volume. And so, like, boss, we could fight them, but we really don't want to fight them. And there was one thing at that time, which I've been informed that this question was made moot over the time. But back then, the idea was that they would also have to pour in tens of thousands of special operations guys, like all of SOCOM, all the Rangers, all the Green Berets, all of the lower tier SEAL teams, and whoever. Everybody in there with laser designators to try to find the anti-aircraft missiles. And then so that was an issue then that became less of an issue with just whatever satellite targeting. They didn't need the laser designators anymore. But anyway, so it was the Pentagon told W. Bush in January of 2007, we don't want to fight them because they'll be able to hit back on, and escalation dominance, meaning the Pentagon only wants to fight if they know that they will control every stage of the fight.
Yep.
And when the war escalates, it's going to be because we escalated it, not
Right.
because they did. And we're going to choose to escalate here, here, here. We're going to bomb their Air Force when we want. We're going to bomb their Navy when we want. We're going to do whatever we want to them. And they're not going to be able to do anything about it. Not really. Otherwise, we don't want to fight at all.
Right.
And
exactly.
this is what Hillary Clinton was saying. And look, all of this was easily, and she was Secretary of State, by the way, not just Bill Clinton's wife. Like, I hate her or whatever, but she's telling it. It's obviously an honest anecdote that she's saying Netanyahu tried to push this stuff on us, and we told them no. And that was actually, in fact, at the time, man, in especially in Obama's first term when she was secretary, there was a real worry, and this goes back to W. Bush years as well, that Israel would just start the war and drag us into it. That Iran would then hit back at American targets, and then America would be forced into the war on Israel's terms. And I always thought he was bluffing, but apparently some of the Democrats really didn't. And this was a big part of their motivation for pushing for the JCPOA, which we already had a safeguards agreement. They were already members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
The War Party just acted like none of that existed. And they just said, we just need another separate deal on top of that. And that was really why they pursued the JCPOA, and which wasn't that bad of a deal despite all the hype against it.
Right.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and to your point as well, Iran the entire time has pretty much been entirely compliant with it. Like, they've bent over backwards with, staying in line and having people come in and doing all their checks and their balances and writing down their little notes and then leaving. And it's amazing because you still have people that, for whatever reason, there's like, oh, like they're like, Iran is just terrible. Like, they've never done it, like they never went along with it. And the JCPOA was so terrible. And like you pointed out, like, we already had the previous agreements that they did, fundamentally like comply with. So it's like it's like they're having to just, it's like they have a dream one night and then they're like, oh, I had this dream, so it must be true about Iran. And so I'm going to take this and this is what we're going to tell from essentially the pulpit.
Yeah. And look, okay, let me tell you about the nuclear program, right? So here's the thing of it, okay? If you're an Israeli or you're just an American hawk, and Iran develops the fuel cycle and the ability to enrich uranium, then you don't give a damn that the Non-Proliferation Treaty guarantees their right to civilian nuclear processes and so forth.
Right.
You're looking at that as just a giant loophole in the NPT. Right. The NPT will let you master the fuel cycle. You'll be able to enrich uranium to whatever percent you want and be able to get yourself within this, what they call breakout capability, where on some short timeline, you'll be able to then have fissile material and make an atom bomb, possibly before somebody could stop you.
Right.
So if you're an Israeli hawk, being honest, but never mind all the propaganda, but just you're an Israeli hawk and you're looking at that, you're saying, well, no, we don't want them to have a civilian program at all. And if we can get America to destroy their civilian program for us, then that's what it'll take. And that's what we want to do. We'll stop at nothing to get them to do that for us. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Now, the Americans' position is, look, we're okay up until last June. All right. Bush and Obama and Trump won, and Biden's position was, listen here, Iran, we don't accept uranium. And I guess Obama eventually did accept uranium enrichment to a low degree in the JCPOA, but we accept your civilian program. Bush did de facto. We accept your civilian program, but if you break out and try to make a nuke, then we're going to bomb the crap out of you before you're done. And we're going to prevent you from getting a bomb one way or the other. So don't even try it. Okay.
Right.
We're not going to start a war like the Israelis want now, but don't you push the limit or we will. Okay. And Obama even gave an interview to Jeffrey Goldberg in 2012, where they titled it in the Atlantic. They titled it, "As President, I Don't Bluff." And it's basically Obama on his knees begging Jeffrey Goldberg to please explain to the Likud that I really, 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 really mean it. that if they
Yep.
do try to make a nuke, I will goddamn bomb them. I swear
Mhm.
I will. But you got to give me a chance to resolve this another way. He's basically like employing Jeffrey Goldberg to be his ambassador to go and get Netanyahu to please give him some
Right.
damn space here is all. It's funny. But he's saying, I don't bluff. I really will. I'll nuke them if I have to
Right.
keep them from getting a nuke, but only if I have to. So please just shut up. Right. That was what it was about. Okay. Now the Iranian side was, we're not making nukes, so don't bomb us.
Yeah.
But if you bomb us, we could make a nuke.
Right.
So back off.
Right.
So that was the standoff. Yeah. That was the standoff. They developed a civilian nuclear program. It's not even true that they had a nuclear weapons research program before 2003, as you'll hear even anti-war people say. That was what the CIA concluded. But in fact, that was based on false assumptions by the DIA about some intercepts, some invoices that they had intercepted for potential dual use materials like specialized magnets and things that later were accounted for being actually used for their civilian purposes, like they said in the first place. So DIA was legitimately suspicious, but then their suspicions were not confirmed. In fact, disconfirmed or whatever, right? And then the other half of it was the damned Israeli forged so-called smoking laptop, or the laptop of death, which was, they claimed, smuggled out of Iran and belonged to a nuclear scientist and had all this stuff on it, but it was totally fake and debunked by Gareth Porter, and even by David Sanger in the New York Times even debunked some of it, as clearly came, it even arrived in the intelligence stream from the Mujahideen cult, communist terrorist cult, that was given the information by the Israelis. And it was the CIA that provided the laptop so that they could say, see, it's a laptop. It was they admitted all of that eventually came out. So the whole idea that they had even a research program up until 2003 was based on, one, a mistake, and two, a lie. And that was it. But then they, according to the CIA, after 2003, it was clear that the decision had made that we're not even going down that road whatsoever. So just forget it. And according to the CIA, the reason why was because George W. Bush, at Israeli behest, had gotten rid of Saddam Hussein for them. And he was the one that they needed to deter. Not even because, of course, what would it take for Iran to be able to deter the United States or Israel? It would take a whole mess of atom bombs and the ability to deliver them before we could invade, which we weren't going to, right? So they were in that precarious position. So they had settled on having this latent nuclear capability. We're not making nukes, but we could. So don't push us. So then here's what happened last June. Oh, wait, let me address the JCPOA here. I don't want to sound like I'm defending Obama. Obama's an absolutely horrible person in 1,000 ways. He ain't nothing but Bill Clinton. That's all he ever was, okay? But just the fact of the matter is, he was trying to prevent a war with Iran. He was not trying to tilt toward Iran. He was not making an alliance with the Ayatollah. The money that he gave them as part of that deal was actually Iranian money that they were trying to spend on American arms that America froze under Jimmy Carter during the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And John Kerry made them the deal that you get some of your own money back and then some sanctions relief was the only thing that America had to do as our side of the deal, and then never did even give them the sanctions relief anyway. And then the Iranian side of the deal was they expanded inspections to even non-nuclear sites like military bases. So wherever the Israelis could make up an accusation, if the Americans could have any credible evidence whatsoever, even enough to persuade Britain and France to agree with us in the vote, we could go and inspect whatever we wanted, was part of the deal. And then they severely rolled back their program, including they poured concrete into the reactor at Arak, A-R-A-K, which was their heavy water reactor that could potentially produce weapons-grade plutonium. And they shut that thing down entirely, leaving only Bushehr, the light water reactor that cannot produce weapons-grade plutonium waste. And then they scaled back the centrifuges by 2/3 at Natanz, and they turned the facility at Fordo from a production facility into research facility only. And then the major flaw in it was that there were pretty short sunset provisions on these things, 5, 10, 15 years on some of these things. Time goes by pretty fast. So What Donald Trump should have done was come in his first term and say, listen, I don't like Barack Obama and I don't like the damn stinking deal that he signed here,
Mhm.
but he was a representative of the United States of America at the time, being its president and all of that. And even if
Mhm.
he was from Kenya. And so I, Donald Trump, hereby say, we got to improve this damn thing. Meet me at the
Right.
table and let's get some of these sunset provisions loosened.
Yeah.
You swear to God, for the 10th time, and again in the JCPOA, that you do not
Mhm.
seek nuclear weapons. Well, then you won't mind allaying my concerns. And he could have played hardball and he could have
for
got
sure.
those sunsets lifted, man. I know he could
Yeah.
have got them
Yeah.
lifted, but he didn't even try that. He let
Yeah.
Netanyahu convince him to just tear up the deal and leave it. Because from the
Mhm.
Hawks' point of view, any deal is getting in the way of them getting their war. You know, there's a
Right.
clip of John Bolton. I have it on my computer here somewhere. There's a clip of John Bolton on a call with AIPAC from 2007,
Mhm.
where he's explaining that with all of our sanctions and all of our threats, we were trying to get Iran to finally give up and
Mhm.
withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty and kick the inspectors out of the country, which, as he says, would have put us in a more advantageous position.
Sure.
Right. Us meaning those of us who want to start this war on Israel's behalf, who refuse to accept negotiations and half measures and
Mhm.
assurances and safeguards, and want the complete and total destruction of the Iranian nuclear program and
Right.
or even its entire regime, and won't settle for at least a war, on some kind of some
Mhm.
kind. And so this is the same thinking going behind Trump and Netanyahu convincing Trump to tear up the JCPOA in 2018, was that, oh, well, now, geez, we don't know what's going on there. Well, yeah, because you just destroyed your own ability to,
Yeah.
which is only partially true, right? Because they still had the safeguards agreement, and the inspectors were still there,
Sure.
and they were still verifying the non-diversion of nuclear
Mhm.
material. But it just made it easier for the administrations to pretend that there's a nuclear threat there. And then
Mhm.
Trump won, waged this massive economic war against them. Obama had called it the crippling sanctions. Under Trump, it
Right.
became maximum pressure. And then after him, when Biden came in, he just kept up the maximum pressure campaign on
Mhm.
full, primary and secondary sanctions, right? Meaning on any country that, or any company that tries to do business with Iran, we'll put you under economic warfare
Right.
too. And the U.S. Treasury has a lot of weight when it comes to things like that. They
For
can
sure. Yeah.
destroy any company or even countries that they wish
Mhm.
sometimes. And so even though the Biden government was full of Obama people, Blinken and Biden and all them, and both of them had at least somewhat participated in the JCPOA getting done, they didn't come in and say, oh, well, Donald Trump, he's the Tasmanian devil and the Russians put him here and he didn't belong in there anyway. And
Right.
he made this terrible rogue wild man decision to tear up our wonderful deal that we had. So let's just get back in it. Right.
Mhm.
They did not do
Right.
that. Instead, they kept the Trump policy
Of
of
course.
not solving it and keeping the pressure up, which they were just essentially keeping the ball on the tee for Donald Trump to come in and pick up where he left off
Right.
4 years later. And so then what happened was last June, remember I said it was this standoff. The Israelis
Mhm.
say, we don't want them to have a nuclear program at all. America, get them. America says, well, we're not going to get them unless they really break out toward a nuke. But then we will. And then Iran,
Right.
don't you attack us and we won't make one. We just have our civilian program. Let's leave it at
Mhm.
that, right? Well, then Netanyahu and Trump last June called their bluff.
Right.
And said, oh, yeah? Well, how are you going to make one if we decimate your program? Huh?
Yeah.
Good point. That was the whole threat.
Right.
We can blow up your Manhattan Project before it can be successful. So you
Right.
only have kind of a half-assed deterrent here, right? But the thing is, yes, they did call their bluff and they did set them back severely.
Mhm.
They took Natanz and Fordo offline. They also destroyed at Isfahan their all-important conversion facility. This is where you take uranium metal, convert it to uranium hexafluoride gas, which is what you need to enrich in the centrifuges. Then you got to turn it back into a metal if you want to make fuel rods out of it, or if you want to make an atom bomb core or anything else out of it. You need to be able to convert it back to a metal again. So without that facility, which America did destroy, then they're just severely crippled. Again, Iraq already had concrete in it, and Boucher is a light water reactor. They didn't bomb that because that would have been a radioactive mess. But there's no nuclear weapons yet. There is no plutonium route to the bomb from Boucher anyway, so there's nothing to worry about there. So, so in other words, look, I mean, America can put firepower on targets, and Trump, use these bunker buster bombs. And I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows for sure, but it's, I guess, maybe even doubtful that those bombs succeeded in destroying all those centrifuges down there at Natanz and Fordo. But they didn't have to, because they got every elevator shaft, and they got every air vent, and they got every, they blew up enough of it, and they encouraged the Iranians to seal off the rest. So anybody working down there was buried alive, if anybody was still down there at the time that the war started. Well, maybe that's doubtful. But those facilities are totally offline, and there's open source intelligence as of last November. But then even just 6 weeks ago or something, Tulsi Gabbard confirmed again that they have not even attempted to reopen these facilities in any way. Now, there is a question of whether they have begun to, and I don't know how far they've gotten, but I don't think it's very far. But supposedly they are attempting to build a new facility at a place called Pickaxe Mountain, which is adjacent to Isfahan.
I've heard some rumblings about that.
Yeah, we'll see how far that goes. But see, but then that's the whole point, though, right? This is why I always said, just let the standoff hold, because you want to go in there and blow up the nuclear program. Then now you're just incentivizing them to make a bomb, but you have not completely, to quote Trump, you have not completely obliterated their ability to make one. You set them back severely. But ultimately, they know how to convert uranium, which they have mines of uranium in their country. They know how to convert uranium to hexafluoride gas, and they know how to convert it back to spin it, and they know how to turn it back to metal again, and that's not going away. And so unless you do change the regime, then that's not going away. And killing the Ayatollah won't change the regime, because the ruling mullahs will just appoint a new Ayatollah. And if you kill him and them, then a new ruling council will appoint a new Ayatollah. And so now you're going to have to send in the entire U.S. Army that it's, the size it's ever existed, in there to now hunt down and kill every last Shiite cleric until there's nobody to call supreme leader anymore. No. Like this is impossible. So don't get yourself started on this. As I said, this is I probably used to be better at it. I'm old and tired now. I've been saying the same thing this whole time, that just do the thought since 07, since even before 05, 06, 07. Just do the thought experiment. You start this thing, how do you end it? Now they have more incentive than ever to make a bomb. Yes, we set them back, but now they have more incentive than ever. I mean, to hear Robert Pape talk about it, and he's an academic. He can be a little bit, academics can be sometimes a little too tied to the textbook about how this works. But boy, does he have a point. I mean, the way he says it, it's just an inescapable fact now that they will get an atom bomb, because their latent deterrent was not enough of a deterrent. And so they will have to race toward bomb now. And that may very well be true. I've heard about what they're, and honestly, he also says that they're just going to ruthlessly exploit their control over the Persian Gulf now. And I think there's potentially limits on both of those things, because there are potential, diplomatic consequences of both actions going forward that they would still have to deal with. For example, if Iran gets an atom bomb, then so does Saudi and the UAE, and maybe Qatar. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know if they really want to do that or not, but hey, the latent deterrent was not enough to stop the United States of America from launching an aggressive war and blasting the crap out of them. Right. So,
and I've heard a number of people, and I believe, people like Larry Johnson and a number of other people that have either been on Judge Napolitano's show or Daniel Davis's show. Like, a lot of these guys have said too, like, well, at this point, like, any country that's watching what's going on, if you're small and you have nothing, like at this juncture, like, you almost need a nuclear weapon just to prevent your country from being just rolled over. And at this juncture, like you were just saying, I honestly could see Iran getting one down the road at this juncture, because it's like, okay, well, we know what happened when we were on the cusp or on the line of potentially getting one, but now it's like, if we have one, that changes potentially the playing field to some degree. And it's like, okay, so what is, I think the message that's sent out to a lot of these other countries is like, look, you can't not, moving forward from here on out, you can't almost not have a nuclear weapon and expect yourself to be secure in your own sovereignty and not be attacked. And
Blame
it's an
Tel Aviv, man.
unfortunate thing,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people, we don't want the proliferation of something like a freaking nuclear weapon, like they're horrible.
And this very well could be the death of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, you saw
Yeah.
where, in Europe, Poland announced that they're going to make nukes, although I don't know if
I
that's
saw
settled
that.
yet, but they said
Yep.
that. The French said that they're now going to increase their stockpile. They're
Yep.
known to have, I believe, 200. They're now going to make more, and because they're worried about the Russians, and they're worried about America's lack of commitment to their defense, which I'm not arguing for that, but I'm saying
Exactly. Right.
in the scheme of things, what's happened here is not that we dissolved NATO in any proper way, but just that Joe Biden picked a fight with the goddamn Russians in Eastern Europe. And then Donald Trump is like, well, screw you guys, and doesn't care about it. So it's created a dynamic where they now have a huge incentive. And then with the death of the meaningfulness of Iran's participation in the non-proliferation regime, if being a member of the non-proliferation treaty is not enough to prevent you from being attacked,
right,
then why be a member of the non-proliferation treaty?
Exactly.
And I think you can see states all over the world even decide, and look, to be very clear about this, like I can be pretty damn right-wing and even like actually probably ultimately favor the dissolution of the United Nations, or even, at least American withdrawal from it. I'm not a big champion of international law, and certainly not of like any kind of one world commie regime to enforce edicts or treaties, even agreed treaties on the rest of the world. In fact, it's a huge problem with what we have now is the UN kind of is the world government,
right,
dominated by the United States, and then with its edicts, picked and chosen by the US to enforce, where we are the world government. USA is the world government, at least the enforcement arm, right? USA is the UN's Pentagon, right?
If that
makes sense. And going to enforce all this stuff and using the international law as a guise that, oh, see, we're just enforcing the law, this kind of thing. I'm totally against all that.
Right.
But so in other words, like if some country announces that they want to withdraw from the NPT and make nukes, they do have the right to do that. And I don't think that we should go and start a war against them to stop them and say that, no, you're forbidden from doing that. I mean, it says in the treaty that you can announce you're withdrawing from the treaty in 6 months and then do so, whatever. But what I am saying is that, think of these treaties basically, right, as like contracts in a land where there's no judges, right? We're like out in the Wild West, but you and I have a deal where the fence line is, right? And it's just better that we both respect that contract and avoid violent conflict so that you can graze your cattle and I can graze my sheep or whatever it is, and stay on each other's good side, over the long term. It's the same thing with these treaties. The United States of America came up with this non-proliferation treaty and insisted that the rest of the world adopt it. It said, listen, if you're a nuclear weapons state, then you promise not to proliferate your nuclear weapons to any other state, and you promise that someday you'll get rid of them. And if you're a non-nuclear weapons state, then you promise never to get them, not by hook or by crook or by buying them on the black market or figuring out how to make them somehow out of plutonium or uranium. And so no nukes for you. And on top of that, you agree to have a safeguards agreement where essentially the local cops get to stand around and inspect all your facilities all the time and monitor all nuclear material and make sure that none of it is diverted to military purposes. So this is a Pretty great invention. Again, you
Right.
don't need a one world commie regime to enforce it. What you need is for the nation states of the world to
Mhm.
feel like it's in their best interest to sign this treaty and
Oh, for
stay
sure.
signed
Yeah.
to it, and not decide that, man, I think we really should listen to the
Yeah.
hawk who's been saying that we should go ahead and make nukes now.
Right.
And so that's what we're talking about here is right is just having a treaty is not one world communism, right? Like there's got to be
Mhm.
a gray area there. This
Right.
international law,
Right.
yes, it is customary. We don't have a world government, thank God. We don't want a world government. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have these agreements between nation states, especially when it comes to what they promise to not do, like
Right.
start wars or make nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting too is seeing like all of the stuff with Iran and it does uh, make me wonder, you know, are we, are we seeing more people start to withdraw from us in terms of realizing like, hey, like maybe taking back our own sovereignty is going to be a big benefit, because clearly like there is this idea that we're all supposed to just jump in every time that something happens. And
Inshallah.
it, and
Yeah,
and the
you're
crazy
right.
thing is it's not just even the organization that we're a part of, being NATO. It's this idea of like Japan, South Korea, where are you? Like this is in your interest. And it's like, dude, like, I mean, maybe you would have had somewhat of an argument there potentially. Not that I agree with it, if you hadn't taken the air defense from these countries to give it to somebody else. But
Right.
that's a whole other conversation, right? And it's like now you're having conversations even with people in NATO, like Poland, who's become, I would argue, in some ways, like more like, like you can keep all that over there. Even though we're a part of NATO, we still kind of just want to do Polish things. And then you have
Yeah.
another article,
I'm sorry,
because I
man. I
dig
gotta
all
run.
over.
I'm
But
I'm up at the time wall here.
okay,
We
but yeah,
can't
just to
do
wrap
Eastern
up.
Europe today, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just like, you're having people that are having just a change of opinion. And so
Yeah.
I think it's really, it's quite telling, and it'll be interesting to see kind of where things go, Scott.
Yeah.
So,
Potentially very
I,
dangerous. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So
All right.
I
Well, thank
really
you again for
appreciate it,
having me,
man.
man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I always appreciate having you on, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
Great.
So,
Thanks.
yeah. Take care. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to this episode. I really, really appreciate it. And as always, I always love having Scott on. He has a great amount of insight, and he brings a lot to the table, especially as it pertains to the Middle East. And perhaps next time we can get maybe into the realm of what's going on in Europe. We kind of did a little bit, but needless to say, there's a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of things that really. That really are, they're developing rapidly. I think there's some patterns that are being set. And so we really got to keep an eye on these things, and we have to pay attention to what the outcomes are going to be. Like I said earlier, it's, yes, you should listen to, what is being said, but more importantly, we have to focus on the actual actions that precede the things that are being said. So, with that being said, I also want to give a quick shout out here to Rebecca Whiting, who was just on last week, and she is running for U.S. Senate in Minnesota. So any Minnesota people, if you're looking for something different, if you're sick of the left and right paradigm, if you're sick and tired of being caught in the middle and being treated just like a number or whatever the case is, Rebecca, from her experiences, from her stance, and from a lot of her principles, I think will do a really good job for Minnesotans. Personally, I voted for her the last time she ran, personally, and she's just a super nice person. She's just one of the normal people, and I think that if you're looking for a different choice, Rebecca is probably going to be your gal. She is the chair of the LPMN, and so if you are looking to try and see more of what she's about, I will put her website into the description below, as well as putting the Scott Horton Academy website into the description below as well. Thank you, each and every one of you, for taking some time to come out and watch this episode with Scott. As I said, I really enjoy having him on, and hopefully we'll be able to do this soon. So with that being said, take care, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you all soon.